In a galaxy that had seen endless wars, humanity's rise to power had been sudden and unexpected. In their quest for peace, they had become the masters of intergalactic diplomacy, though their methods were often harsh. They had learned to conquer not just through strength, but by capturing prisoners, turning enemies into subordinates. Among the prisoners was Kari Vethari, a proud warrior of the Serathi, an alien species known for their fierce combat skills and strict emotional control. Kari had been taken as a prisoner years ago during a violent skirmish, and now she was forced to work under the command of Captain Leon Drake, a human officer with a reputation for treating his prisoners with respect. He had ordered Kari to serve him, but in his eyes, she was more than just a captive. He didn't view her as a mere enemy or a tool to be used. Instead, he saw her as a soldier, one who deserved respect, despite her captivity. At first, Kari hated Leon. She despised the way he spoke to her as if she were an equal, not a slave. The Serathi were a proud race, and to be bound in chains, forced to serve a human, was a humiliation she could never accept. Yet there was something about Leon that made her pause. His calm demeanor and lack of cruelty confused her. The human she had known in battle had been quick to anger, quick to strike. But Leon was different. His respect for her, though a kind of insult to her pride, was something she couldn't entirely dismiss. Every day, she worked under his command, cleaning, repairing equipment, and performing other menial tasks, all the while maintaining a cold and distant attitude. Kari did her work with precision, her movements sharp and controlled, but she kept her gaze down whenever Leon was near. She couldn't look at him directly, not without feeling that strange mix of admiration and resentment. But Leon didn't seem to mind. He would give her orders with a simple "thank you, Kari," after she finished each task. It wasn't the usual command of an officer to a servant. There was something different in his tone, a sincerity that she couldn't ignore. At first, Kari thought it was a trick, that he was somehow playing a game with her, trying to break her spirit. But the longer she served him, the more she began to wonder if he truly believed in the equality he spoke of. The ship they were stationed on was small but well-equipped, a remote outpost on the edge of human space. The crew was a tight-knit group, and though Kari was the only alien among them, they treated her as one of their own. They didn't see her as a prisoner, but as a colleague. This bothered Kari, even more than her chains. How could they be so casual about it? Didn't they realize she was an enemy? Didn't they see her as a threat? Leon, however, seemed unbothered by her hostility. He didn't push her to open up, nor did he ask her to show any gratitude for her freedom. Instead, he gave her the space to process everything on her own terms. He knew, in the back of his mind, that breaking her pride would take time. But he was patient. After all, humanity had learned to be patient through their years of struggle and survival. One afternoon, as Kari worked alone in the engine room, repairing a damaged power conduit, Leon walked in. His footsteps were quiet, but Kari still heard him approach. She didn't turn to face him, knowing he would say something that would make her uncomfortable. He always did. "You're doing well, Kari," Leon said calmly. She stiffened, the compliment as foreign to her as his kindness. "I do what is required," she replied curtly, trying to hide the flicker of something deeper in her chest. The words she spoke were true in one way, but they didn't capture the emotions that boiled beneath the surface. She was here, working under his orders, but it didn't mean she had surrendered her pride. Not yet. Leon didn't push for more. He simply nodded, watching her work. It was a strange kind of silence that stretched between them, neither of them speaking for a long time. But in that moment, Kari felt a crack in her armor. She didn't know why she was allowing herself to feel this way, but it was undeniable. His respect was unlike anything she had ever known. He didn't treat her like a prisoner. He treated her like a person. When the work was finished, Leon turned to leave, but then stopped. "If you need anything, Kari," he said, "don't hesitate to ask." It was such a simple statement, but it lingered with her. There was something about his voice, the way he said her name, that made her feel uncertain. She couldn't explain it, but the words unsettled her. She had always believed that she would die in battle, a warrior's death, with honor. But now, under the watchful eyes of this human, she was beginning to feel something else, a longing for freedom she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. As Leon walked away, Carrie stood still, the weight of her chains pressing against her mind more than her body. For the first time in years, she wondered if there was more to life than serving her people. Was there more to life than hate? The questions lingered in her mind as the hours passed, and for the first time, Carrie found herself looking forward to the next time Leon would speak to her. The peaceful hum of the ship's engines was shattered by the sudden alarm blaring throughout the outpost. Carrie's heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, she immediately stood up, her muscles tensing as years of training kicked in. The crew, all business, moved swiftly to their stations. Leon's voice came over the loudspeakers, calm but urgent. "Attention, all personnel. Prepare for immediate action. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack." Harry's hand went to the plasma rifle she had been assigned months ago. She had learned how to use it, though she had never imagined using it in defense of humans. But now, with the harsh sounds of enemy ships approaching, she couldn't ignore the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was a soldier first, and this was what she had been trained for. Leon appeared in the hallway, moving quickly as the crew assembled in the briefing room. His face was grim, but his eyes were focused, sharp. "Carrie," he said, catching her attention. "You're with me. We need every fighter we can get." Carrie didn't hesitate. She followed him down the narrow corridor, her footsteps steady, despite the chaos around her. The humans may have captured her, but they hadn't taken her skills. They hadn't stolen the warrior inside her. That part of her would always remain, no matter how many chains or words they used. They reached the central control room, where the tactical map of the system flashed on a large screen. The red dots representing enemy ships were moving fast, converging on their position. Leon and his crew worked with practiced efficiency, shouting orders and adjusting their positions as the tension in the air grew thicker. "What are we dealing with, Captain?" Carrie asked, her voice clipped. "Harbinger drones," Leon replied, his voice even, but his expression dark. "Ancient machines. No mercy, no negotiations. They destroy everything in their path." Carrie's gaze narrowed. The Harbingers were known to be an unstoppable force, a plague of sorts that ravaged entire star systems without discrimination. Entire civilizations had fallen to them. Humanity had only recently managed to survive their first encounter, and now, here they were again, threatening to wipe out everything. "Are we ready for them?" Carrie asked, adjusting her grip on her weapon. Leon nodded. "We'll fight, just like we always do." She could feel the weight of those words, the responsibility, the determination. The humans didn't give up, not even in the face of certain destruction. It was a quality that Carrie found both frustrating and fascinating. She had always thought that the Serethi, with their strict codes of honor, were the strongest. But now, seeing these humans prepare to fight for their survival, she wondered if their strength came from something deeper, something that she had never truly understood. The alarms went off again, and the entire crew snapped into action. Carrie moved swiftly to her assigned post, alongside Leon and several of his officers. As the first drones breached the ship's outer defenses, Leon gave the order to open fire. Carrie fired her plasma rifle, feeling the intense heat of each shot, the satisfaction of hitting her target. The drones, mechanical and cold, were ruthless in their approach, but they were not invincible. Her shots landed with precision, one after another, disabling several of the attackers. Leon fought by her side, never asking her to do more than she could, but pushing her just enough to make her realize her full potential. "Focus, Carrie," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need to hold them off until the rest of the fleet can arrive." The battle raged on, and the Serethi and Carrie began to take over, her training taking full control. She moved with a fluid grace, her shots never missing, her focus unwavering. But as she fought, she began to notice something strange. For the first time, she didn't just feel like a soldier fighting for survival. She felt like part of something. She wasn't alone in this battle. There was something unspoken between her and the humans. Their unity, their resolve, was something that stirred a feeling deep within her. Leon's voice cut through her thoughts again. "We've got this, Carrie. Stay sharp." She snapped back to attention, her hand moving faster than she thought possible, firing once more. The drones fell one by one, their cold, mechanical bodies crashing into the walls of the control room. But the fight was far from over. New waves of drones came, and Carrie could see the exhaustion beginning to show in her human companions. But Leon never slowed. He fought with a relentless intensity, his eyes burning with determination. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to protect. And that was what made all the difference. For a moment, Carrie forgot she was a prisoner. She forgot the chains, the hate, the bitterness that had defined her for so long. All that mattered was the fight. As the hours passed, the battle finally began to turn in their favor. The drones, though powerful, could not match the strength and determination of the humans and Carrie working together. With one final, well-aimed shot, Carrie took down the last of the attackers. The control room was silent for a moment, save for the hum of the ship's systems and the heavy breathing of the crew. Leon, covered in sweat and grime, walked over to Carrie. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something different in them. Respect, not just for her skill, but for who she was. "You did well, Carrie," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. Carrie nodded, still catching her breath. "We did well, Captain." There was no more distance between them, no more chains, no more prisoner and master. In that moment, they were equals. For the first time, Carrie realized that perhaps the humans had more to offer than she had ever imagined. And as the ship sailed into the aftermath of the battle, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The days following the battle were filled with recovery. The crew of the outpost worked around the clock, making repairs and restoring systems. But amid the routine, Carrie found herself in a strange kind of silence. The tension that had once consumed her mind, her hatred for the humans, her shame at being a prisoner, had started to fade. She had fought with them, bled with them, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. Carrie stood in the observation deck, looking out into the vast expanse of space. The stars were scattered like tiny diamonds in the dark, each one a reminder of how small her world had become. She hadn't been home in years, and even if she could return, she wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. The memories of war, of her people's prideful rage, felt distant, almost foreign. Footsteps approached behind her, and Carrie stiffened. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Leon was the only one who ever seemed to find her alone. "You should rest," Leon said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "You've been through a lot." Carrie turned, meeting his gaze without hesitation. She had always avoided looking him in the eyes, but something had changed. His eyes, though tired, still held that steady gaze, full of respect, a respect she hadn't known she would ever feel for a human. "I don't need rest," she replied sharply. "I've seen worse." Leon didn't flinch. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve it." He paused, stepping closer. "We all need to take a break, Carrie. Even you." Carrie wanted to snap at him, to push him away, but something in his voice made her hesitate. For all his calmness, for all the respect he showed her, she could feel the concern in him. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Surathi warriors didn't have the luxury of care. They fought alone, lived alone, and died alone. But here, with Leon and his crew, she felt something she had long ago buried under layers of pride and anger. She turned back to the window, staring out at the stars again. "I am not like you," she said quietly. "I do not need your pity." Leon stood next to her, his arms folded across his chest. "I'm not pitying you, Carrie. I'm offering you something better." She glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "And what is that?" "A choice," Leon said simply. "You don't have to be what they made you. You don't have to live with that anger forever. You can choose a different path." Carrie felt a pang deep in her chest. The words were both foreign and familiar, like a whisper from a life she had left behind. For so long, she had believed that her purpose was to fight for her people, for her honor, for the glory of the Sirathi. But now, after everything, she wasn't so sure. Her world had been turned upside down, and the battle she had fought for so long seemed so meaningless now, lost in the light of the choices before her. "I don't know how to choose anything else," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I've only ever known war. It's all I was ever taught." "You're more than just a warrior, Carrie," Leon said softly. "I've seen it in you. I've seen the way you fight, not out of hate, but because you want to protect. You want something more." Carrie's eyes closed for a moment, as if to shut out the words, but they still echoed in her mind. She could feel the truth of them, but it was a truth that terrified her. What was she if she wasn't a warrior? What did she become when the chains of duty no longer defined her? When she opened her eyes, Leon was still standing beside her. "You don't have to change overnight," he said. "Take it one step at a time. No one's asking you to forget who you are. But maybe it's time to find out who else you could be." Carrie was silent for a long time. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning, and for the first time, she allowed herself to listen. She wasn't sure she could fully trust this new path yet, but she was willing to listen. There was something about the way Leon spoke, something about the way he looked at her, that made her wonder if there was more to her life than she had ever imagined. The quiet hum of the ship filled the silence, and Carrie took a deep breath. "You humans," she began, her voice softer than it had been in a long time. "You never give up. You fight, even when it seems impossible." Leon smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. "That's what makes us human." Carrie nodded slowly. Perhaps that's something I could learn from you." For the first time, Leon's smile widened, but he didn't say anything more. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a moment shared in the vastness of space. As Carrie stood beside him, looking out at the stars once more, she realized that her journey wasn't just about escaping captivity. It was about discovering something far more complicated, herself. And for the first time in years, she was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond the chains of her past. The question was no longer whether she could choose a different path. The question was, what kind of person would she become if she did? And that was the hardest choice of all. Days turned into weeks, and life aboard the ship slowly settled into a routine. The Harbinger attack was behind them, but the weight of their victory hung heavily in the air. Carrie had not fully accepted Leon's words, but she couldn't deny that something had changed within her. She was no longer the angry prisoner who resented her captors. Now she was someone still searching for a path forward. And Leon, with his calm presence and unwavering respect, had become a quiet guide, though neither of them had ever spoken about it aloud. Despite the growing sense of unity on the ship, there was still an invisible barrier between Kari and the crew. The humans treated her with kindness, yes, but Carrie couldn't shake the feeling that they still saw her as an outsider. She had not forgotten that she was, in fact, a prisoner. She had not forgotten the chains that had bound her for so long, even if they were now invisible to others. One afternoon, as the ship coasted through an uncharted sector, Carrie found herself in the cargo bay, the soft hum of the engines lulling her into a rare moment of quiet. Her fingers traced the edge of a crate, her mind lost in thought. It wasn't often that she allowed herself to think deeply about her past. She was too busy surviving, too busy learning how to live in this new world, but today was different. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Carrie." She looked up to see Leon standing at the entrance of the cargo bay, his gaze steady but full of something more, something she couldn't quite name. He didn't approach right away. Instead, He simply stood there, watching her. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said, his tone casual, though there was a hint of curiosity in his voice. Carrie stood up straight, brushing her hands off on her uniform. She was still adjusting to the human way of speaking. They didn't hide their thoughts like the Serathi, always careful with their words. For a moment, she wondered what he wanted. But then she realized it didn't matter. It wasn't about orders, or command, or duty. It was simply about two people who had, in some strange way, found common ground. "I come here to think," she replied, her voice softer than usual. "It's quiet. It helps me clear my mind." Leon nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I get that. Space has a way of doing that to you. It's peaceful in its own way." Carrie didn't speak right away. She was still learning how to open up, how to speak without the anger that had always colored her words. But Leon didn't push her, didn't rush her to share her thoughts. He simply waited, his presence steady and patient. Finally, Carrie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I would be here, among humans. I thought my life was always going to be about fighting, about war." She looked down at her hands, remembering the years of battle, the bloodshed. "But now, I'm not sure what to think. I feel lost." Leon stepped closer, his expression softening. "It's okay to feel lost, Carrie. You've been through a lot. But you're not alone in this. None of us are." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time without hesitation. "I know," she said quietly, "but it doesn't change what I am. I'm not like you." Leon smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in it. "No, you're not like me. But that doesn't mean you can't be part of this crew. You have something to offer. You've already shown that, time and time again." Carrie's chest tightened at his words. She had always believed that her worth was in battle, in being the strongest, the fiercest warrior. But Leon had never asked her to prove her strength. Instead, he had seen something else in her, something she had buried under years of pride and pain. "I don't know how to be part of a team," Carrie admitted. "I've always fought alone. I don't know how to be this." Leon didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, as if letting her words settle in the space between them. And for a long moment, Carrie was afraid he would say something that would make her feel even more alone than she already did. But then he spoke, his voice quiet and sure. "You don't have to know everything right now," he said. "None of us do. We all have our own struggles, our own battles. But we fight them together. And sometimes, that's enough." Carrie looked at him, her mind racing. She had spent so long alone, believing that independence was the only path to survival. But Leon's words, his quiet strength, made her wonder if maybe there was another way. "Maybe I can learn," she said, her voice tentative, as though the idea was still new, still foreign. "Maybe I can try." Leon smiled again, a real smile this time, and it made Carrie feel something. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A small, fragile hope that maybe there was a place for her in this world, despite the past that clung to her like a shadow. "That's all any of us can do," Leon said. "Try." As Carrie stood there, a strange sense of peace washed over her. The quiet revolution inside her wasn't something she could rush. It would take time. But the first step had been taken, and for the first time in years, Carrie felt a glimmer of something more than survival. She felt the stirrings of something like belonging. She wasn't sure where this path would lead her, but for the first time, she was willing to walk it. The days continued to drift by in a quiet rhythm aboard the ship. Life had become more predictable, less chaotic than Carrie was used to. The crew members had begun to treat her differently, not as a prisoner or even as an outsider, but as part of the team. Slowly, Carrie began to shed the armor of distance she had worn for so long. The walls she had built to keep herself safe, to keep herself alone, were crumbling bit by bit. Yet, there were moments when doubt crept in. Times when Carrie would catch herself slipping back into the warrior mindset, when the weight of her past, of the battles she had fought alone, threatened to pull her back into the cold isolation she had known for so many years. She would watch the crew work together, laugh together, and feel a deep pang of longing. She wanted to be part of that camaraderie, but she didn't know how to bridge the gap between herself and them. Leon had noticed her hesitation, her moments of silence, but he said nothing. He let her find her own way, never rushing her, always there when she needed him. It was a kindness Carrie had never experienced before, and it left her feeling both grateful and confused. She wasn't used to kindness, at least not without an agenda. And Leon, though always steady and calm, never seemed to ask for anything in return. One afternoon, after another quiet shift, Carrie found herself alone in the mess hall, a place she usually avoided. The loud chatter and laughter of the crew made her feel like an intruder. But today, she needed to push past that feeling. She sat at a corner table, picking at her meal, lost in thought. The crew, busy as always, hardly noticed her. It was the first time in a long while that she wasn't treated like the new person or the outsider. She had just finished eating when the sound of footsteps broke the silence. She looked up, startled to find Leon standing there, holding a tray with food. His eyes met hers, and without a word, he slid into the seat across from her. "You're quiet today," Leon remarked, his voice as casual as always. He didn't sound like he was probing, just observing. Carrie hesitated before responding. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" She shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to explain the jumble of emotions that had been swirling inside her. "About everything," she said finally. "About how I don't belong here. How I don't know how to be part of this." Leon didn't respond right away. He just watched her, his eyes soft, understanding. Carrie looked down at the table, feeling exposed. She wasn't used to sharing her doubts. It made her feel weak. "You know," Leon said after a moment, "when I first joined the crew, I didn't feel like I belonged either. I wasn't like the others. I was different. But over time, I realized that what makes a person part of something is the willingness to be open, the willingness to trust others." Carrie glanced up, surprised. Leon's words hit her harder than she expected. Trust. It had always been something she fought against. After everything her people had been through, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. And yet, here was a human who, despite everything, was offering it freely to her. "I don't know how to trust," she admitted quietly, almost as if the words had slipped out before she could stop them. Leon's expression softened, and he nodded as though he understood exactly what she meant. "It's not easy," he said, his voice low. "It takes time. But trust isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, about letting people in, little by little. And sometimes, it's about taking a risk." Carrie felt a lump form in her throat. "I've been alone for so long," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to let people in." Leon's gaze didn't waver. He didn't try to offer empty comfort, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made Carrie feel safe, despite herself. "It's not easy," he said again, "but you don't have to do it all at once. Take small steps. We're all here for you. You don't have to carry this alone." For a moment, Carrie said nothing. The weight of his words sank deep into her, and she finally allowed herself to feel the comfort in them. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a simple offer of connection. It was terrifying, and yet, somehow, it felt right. "I don't know if I can ever be like you," Carrie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Leon's smile was soft, genuine. "You don't have to be like me. You just have to be yourself. That's enough." Carrie swallowed hard, fighting back the sudden surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. The thought of letting go of her past, of trusting someone else, felt like stepping into the unknown. But maybe, just maybe, it was a risk worth taking. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer strained or awkward. Leon's quiet presence was a steady anchor, and for the first time, Carrie allowed herself to feel the faintest spark of hope. Maybe she could trust him. Maybe she could trust this crew. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her that wasn't defined by the pain of her past. The rest of the crew began to trickle in, laughing and talking as they always did. But for Carrie, the world felt smaller now, easier to navigate. Leon had given her something she had never expected, the possibility of a life beyond survival. And though it was still a long road ahead, she felt herself taking the first steps towards something new. As the noise of the crew filled the room, Carrie glanced at Leon, a flicker of a smile crossing her face. She wasn't alone anymore, not in the way she used to be. And that thought made all the difference. "You're right," Carrie said softly. "Maybe I can try to trust, just a little." Leon's smile grew. That's all any of us can do. And in that quiet moment, Carrie realized that the walls she had built around herself were starting to crumble, brick by brick, piece by piece. And for the first time, she was allowing herself to believe that there might be something better on the other side. The days aboard the ship had taken on a new rhythm for Carrie. Each day was a small victory, a quiet step forward. She still had moments of doubt, moments where she found herself slipping back into the cold, lonely mindset she had lived with for so long. But with each passing day, the walls around her heart seemed to weaken, crumbling under the weight of the trust Leon and the crew had shown her. Carrie had started to join the others more often. She ate with them in the mess hall, laughed with them when something funny happened, and even helped with the daily chores. It was strange, this new way of living. There was no war to fight, no enemy to destroy. For the first time in her life, Carrie found herself at a crossroads. The warrior in her told her to keep her distance, to remain on guard. But the woman she was beginning to become urged her to lean in, to trust, to be a part of something greater than herself. Leon had noticed the change in her, and he didn't let it go unnoticed. He had always been patient with her, never pushing too hard, but now he seemed to be offering her small moments of connection, words of encouragement when she needed them, or a gentle reminder when she was slipping back into her old ways. But there were still days when the weight of her past bore down on her, and those days were the hardest. On one of those days, the ship received a distress signal from a nearby colony. The message was faint, barely understandable, but it was enough. A human settlement was under attack, and they needed help. The crew immediately set to work, preparing for what they knew would be another fight. But Carrie felt a knot form in her stomach. The thought of combat, of returning to that familiar chaos, filled her with both dread and longing. She had always fought for her people, for survival. But now, after everything that had changed, she wasn't sure what she was fighting for anymore. Leon found her in the corridor as the crew geared up. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, waiting. Carrie turned to him, her voice quiet. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Leon. I don't know if I can go back to the battlefield." Leon studied her for a moment, then spoke, his tone calm but firm. "You don't have to fight for the same reasons you used to, Carrie. You're not the same person you were before. You fight now because it's the right thing to do, because there are people who need you. You're not alone anymore." Carrie closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She wasn't sure if she believed them fully, but the idea of fighting for something beyond survival, beyond duty, was a foreign but comforting thought. Could she do this? Could she fight for others, not out of rage or fear, but because it was the right thing to do? "I'm scared," Carrie admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Leon placed a hand on her shoulder, a reassuring gesture. "It's okay to be scared, but it's not about being fearless. It's about fighting anyway." Carrie nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The ship was already in motion, heading toward the colony. The crew was ready, the mission was clear, and there was no room for hesitation. As the Harbinger approached the colony, the tension in the air grew thicker. The distress signal had been from a remote human settlement, a place Carrie had never been. The view from the observation deck was unsettling. Smoke rising from the surface, a haze of destruction hanging in the air. "Get ready," Leon said as he entered the room. His face was serious now, the weight of command evident in his eyes. "We're not sure who's attacking yet, but we need to move quickly. We don't leave people behind." Carrie didn't respond at first, but she stood up and followed Leon without a second thought. She could feel her pulse quicken, her instincts kicking in as they prepared for the landing. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was no longer just a warrior of the Serathi. She was someone who could make a difference. When the crew touched down, the sounds of battle were immediate. The colony was under siege, the enemy unclear, but the screams and gunfire were unmistakable. Carrie's heart raced, but she stayed calm, focused. Leon gave her a quick look, a silent confirmation. This was it. They charged into the fray, weapons drawn, as chaos unfolded around them. The colony's defenders were fighting desperately, but they were outnumbered. Carrie's eyes scanned the battlefield, every fiber of her being alert. She had been in battles like this before, fighting with everything she had, trusting no one, trusting only herself. But now, it was different. She fought not for honor, not for vengeance, but for the people around her, for the lives that needed saving. In the middle of the battle, Carrie saw a young girl, no older than 10, trapped under a fallen piece of debris. Her heart stopped for a moment. But then her training kicked in. Without thinking, Carrie sprinted toward the girl, lifting the heavy debris off her with ease. The child looked up at Carrie, eyes wide with fear, but she was alive. Carrie didn't stop to think, didn't hesitate. She grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her to safety, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you," the girl whispered, her voice shaky. Carrie nodded, but the words stuck in her throat. There was no time for thanks, no time for anything but the mission. But as they ran toward cover, Carrie realized something. This was why she fought. Not for war, not for victory, but for moments like this. Moments when she could save a life, when she could make a real difference. As the battle raged on, Carrie felt something inside her shift. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. She wasn't fighting out of fear or anger. She was fighting for a future. And that was a battle worth winning. The battle had been fierce, but in the end, the crew of the Harbinger emerged victorious. The attackers were driven off, and the surviving colonists were safe, thanks to the efforts of everyone on board. But as the dust settled and the quiet after the storm took hold, Carrie felt the weight of the victory settle on her shoulders. It wasn't the triumph she had been used to, the kind where the enemy's defeat meant the end of the war. This victory felt different. It wasn't about bloodshed or glory. It was about saving lives. Carrie walked among the survivors, offering whatever comfort she could, though words didn't come easily to her. She had never been good at comforting others, especially those who had been through so much. But today, for the first time, she understood the importance of simply being there, of sharing the silence, of offering a steady hand. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was someone who could bring peace, even if only for a moment. Leon found her standing near the edge of the colony, looking out over the damage. The settlement had been badly hit, but it was still standing. There was a sense of hope in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't the end for them. It was the beginning of something new. Carrie didn't know what her place was in this new world, but for the first time, she felt like she had one. "You did good today," Leon said, stepping up beside her. His voice was quiet but filled with genuine respect. Carrie turned to him, her heart tightening. He had always seen something in her that she couldn't see in herself, and for the first time, she was beginning to see it too. "I didn't fight for the same reasons this time," she admitted, her voice soft. "I fought because it was the right thing to do, because I could make a difference." Leon nodded, his eyes steady. "That's all anyone can do, make a difference where they can." Carrie didn't speak for a moment. She was still processing everything. The battle, the people she had helped, the fact that she was no longer fighting for revenge, but for something bigger, something she couldn't quite name yet. "I'm scared," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. Leon looked at her, understanding in his eyes. "What are you scared of?" Carrie swallowed hard, the words coming slowly, as though she had to dig them up from deep within herself. "I'm scared that I'll never fully belong. That no matter how much I try, I'll always be the outsider, the one who doesn't fit in." Leon stood there for a long moment, considering her words. He didn't respond immediately, but instead, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. A simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "You're not alone, Carrie," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "None of us are. We're all just trying to figure out where we belong. But you have a place here. Don't doubt that." Carrie turned away, looking out over the colony again. Her eyes scanned the survivors, people she had helped protect. And for the first time, she realized that they weren't looking at her with fear or suspicion or the distance she had grown used to. They saw her as one of their own, a part of the community they were rebuilding together. It wasn't just Leon who believed in her anymore. It was them too. The realization was both overwhelming and freeing. She had spent so long convinced that she had to carry the burden of her past alone. But in this moment, she understood that healing didn't happen in isolation. It happened in connection, with others, with the people who needed her and the ones she could trust. For the first time, Carrie smiled. Not the guarded, fleeting smile of someone trying to hide her pain, but a real smile. It was small, but it was enough. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that for the first time, she was ready to face it. Not as a lone warrior, but as someone who was part of something bigger, part of a crew, part of a family. "We'll figure it out," she said, more to herself than to Leon. "We'll figure out where we belong." Leon smiled in return, one step at a time. As the sun set over the colony, the crew began to pack up, preparing to leave. There was still much work to be done, but the mission was over. The Harbinger would take them back to the stars, back to wherever their journey would lead them next. Carrie knew that she wasn't just going back to the ship. She was going back to a new life. A life where she didn't have to fight alone anymore. She stood with Leon for a long while, watching the last of the survivors rebuild their homes. The weight of everything she had lost still sat heavily on her heart, but now there was something else in its place. Hope. For the first time in years, Carrie felt like she had a future. And maybe, just maybe, that future was worth fighting for. As the Harbinger lifted off, the stars waiting ahead, Carrie's mind raced with all that she had learned. She had come so far. From the cold, angry prisoner to someone who was now part of a team, part of something that could bring hope to others. The journey was far from over, but Carrie knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just surviving. She was living, and that was all she needed.